Okay, we're now streaming live.
Oh, excellent.
We're now streaming live. Good evening and welcome. I'm John from Broadsheet. I'm trying to do about 6 things at one time. Welcome to Tomorrow Tonight. We had a full start there a while ago. We're honoured to be joined by Bernard Purcell, London-based editor of the Irish World. Good evening, Bernard.
Good evening, John.
You're very welcome. You were in the middle of discussing the RTE journalist Mike Burns, who died last weekend.
That's right. Mike Burns died aged 84 last weekend in Dublin. He was one of the most astonishing journalists ever to come out of Ireland, and who could hold his own in any country, in any news organisation. It's his funeral tomorrow, Wednesday. He was 84, he turned 84 in January. He would be known to many as the London editor of RTE at a time of particular tensions between Dublin and London in the mid to late 1980s into the early 90s. But he had a very, very storied career from long before that, in the 1960s, in television, and rising to head of RTE News, radio news, I should say, and he transformed RTE radio's output. But as I said, he was quite the most phenomenal journalist that I think anybody ever encountered. He was born in Leicester, grew up in Ballintublin, Roscommon. In fact, he was his opening gambit to very many people would be, "What part of Roscommon were you from? Where are you from?" He started in a show band, the Premier Aces. He was a founder member he played the saxophone. Ended up in newspapers on the beat in northwest England, alongside the likes of Michael Parkinson, who we tried to talk out of going into telly because it was just a fad. He would alternate between working, as I said, up in Cheshire and Manchester, and would come back at weekends to work on the Sunday Independent, which he subsequently joined as a full-time journalist, and then became one of the very early pioneers of RTE in the early 1960s. He covered, he made a lifelong friend with Sir Jeremy Isaacs, the founder of Channel 4 and also World in Action, because he was a producer at Granada, and he ran into some difficulties covering the Kennedy visit to Wexford, to the ancestral homeland in, I think, 1962. Mike Burns, the consummate fixer, was able to fix it for him. And this isn't something that I actually learned from Mike. I ended up sitting beside Jeremy Isaacs on the tube one day, and he told me all about it. And that got an awful lot of goodwill for RTE for subsequent years.
There's your brilliant obituary, Bernard, in this week's Irish World. It's a great read. It covers what you just discussed, but also, I mean, it really is an incredible career, isn't it? I mean, in terms of journalism, it'll never be,
we will never see his like again.
It will never be repeated in terms of. I mean, he covered, like you say, the most interesting times to probably cover, the London office of RTE.
Yes, and it was a bit of a backwater with people being parachuted in up until then. But I mean, you're talking about a period that had obviously Anglo-Irish tensions, had terrorism, had the Birmingham Six, the Guildford Four, and any number of things happening. I mean,
and he had Brian O'Connell and Leo Enright there.
Leo Enright originally, he brought in Leo, who had left 2FM News or Radio 2 News, and they were quite a formidable pairing. Sometimes there were sparks, but because there were two very, very large egos in the room, and both immensely talented individuals, one should say so. And then Brian O'Connell came along, I think, in 1989. But all of that expansion was made possible by how Mike Burns had actually changed the presence of London and of the RTE operation in London, in Westminster. They had he was always very astute, and he positioned them near all the other broadcasters. So it was like shooting fish in a barrel sometimes. They could get any number of that they'd have struggled to get on other occasions. But to give you there's a story I haven't put in the paper there, but he lived in Teddington with his beloved wife Lynette, who we lost 20 years ago. But shortly after they came back to Ireland in the early 90s, they decided to go on holiday to, I think, and I'm open to correction on this, I think it was somewhere like Guyana or Grenada. It was probably Grenada. And they arrived, and as they arrived in their hotel room, there was an invitation to reception being held by the First Minister that night. And his wife thought, oh God, it's Burns showing off again or something. And he said, I have no idea what this is about. But they went to the reception anyway. And it turned out that many years earlier, when they were living in Teddington, they used to, coming back from Dublin or coming back from anywhere, they would take the bus from the airport and would strike up a friendly conversation with the driver. Sometimes they were the only passengers, but they got to know him regularly. Some years later, it turned out he was the First Minister where they were going to, so they were on the list and invited them. And that was the kind of thing that happened to him regularly. He would bring in to the Strangers' Bar in the House of Commons a friend of his who would be low-key, so wearing a baseball cap. People wouldn't necessarily know who he was, but they didn't know who he was, especially a lot of the MPs in that. And it was Paul Newman. He'd been friendly with since the 60s. As I said, he was friendly. He'd be having lunch with, say, Peggy Noonan, Reagan's scriptwriter, or speechwriter, I should say. He was going back to the 60s. He was friendly with people like Walter Cronkite. But now, there are people who are self-consciously self-important networkers who think that they are, and it often happens with journalists, and they think they are part of, they think they're players rather than observers. That was never the case with Mike. Well, he loved politics, he loved politicians, but he was just, he was a very generous, very kind man, but ultimately social. And so he didn't care for airs and graces, but he would be as friendly with the doorkeeper, find out their whole family story, or if there's a particular event happening in their life, as he would be with, say, a minister, or if he made genuine, long-lasting friendships with people, and was the most consummately social person that. And genuinely social. He tended, on occasion, you'd have people in Dublin saying, oh yeah, he's just, it's just an excuse to go on the tear. Because some of his lunches were legendary, and people used to refer to sometimes what would be known as third-degree burns. And there was one occasion when a very high-ranking Home Office official was sent in a minicab horizontally, holding a bottle of vintage port. Somebody else from another important government department ended up, well, the less said about a lot of this, the better.
Yeah. Bernard, can you just move your mic a little bit? It's slightly muffled. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, brilliant. Yeah, it's great. It was just a little slightly muffled.
Sorry about that.
Go on. I have a photograph to show you. I'm not sure you might be familiar with it. You're certainly familiar with the people in it, but it might sum up.
There's a whole story associated with that as well. I mean, you have, well, at the back there's Jerry O'Regan, there's PJ Cunningham, there's Willie Dillon, that's Sean Dykeman being the worst for wear, and that's that's
fine.
the Andy Shepherd, diplomatic correspondent of RT at the time, and that is Mike Burns there. Now, on that occasion, they had to go through this whole charade of being taken to a secret location, that was the Anglo-Irish Agreement in 1980.
Oh yeah, okay.
Mike had actually got a copy of it earlier and on hush hush, and actually went along with all the pretense, but he made sure that it got back to Montrose, was copied, photocopied, and then given back, and he'd had everything lock, stock, and barrel before they went through that entire charade. And
so this is for the signing, like this is a total theatre,
yeah.
Right?
Yes.
No wonder
the other journalists didn't have it. He had. He was going through the motions at that time of, and I don't think he'd even told Diggy at the time, who's his best mate from Galway.
Yeah.
But there is a long and involved story about that. But he had actually managed, because he always had sources on all sides. So
he certainly does. He does have a certain kind of feeling of maybe frustration or something there. Trying to tell them, but it's a fantastic piece you wrote in the Irish World this week. Also, I just wanted to ask you about this. You write at the end, it's an asterisk. At one
Oh
point,
yes.
at one point in the 1980s and 90s, all but one of the senior Irish journalists covering British Irish politics, terrorism, blah, 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 north and south of the border in Ireland had coincidentally been born in Britain or the UK.
That's
The only one who
correct.
wasn't British born, as it happened, also entitled to a British passport. Is that you?
No, 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 no. I actually was born in the UK, and my first passport was British, but that was to cover the Hagrup report, Northern Ireland and Strasbourg. I couldn't get
Okay.
the, but no, that Mike was born in, as I said, in
Oh,
Leicester.
yeah.
I think Brian O'Connell was born in Essex. Leo Enright was born in the UK. Norman Stockton, the UTV political editor, was born, I think, in Blackpool. The the BBC political editor, I think at the time might have been Dennis Murray. He was, I think, it was Dennis, but whomever the BBC editor was born in, I think, Britain rather than Northern Ireland. Somebody who subsequently joined the, sorry, at the time you had Frank Miller, who was born in Belfast, born in Northern Ireland, but covering it for a paper in the south. And the only person who might be, I mean, in fact, we used to tease him at the time that he was arguably, possibly, because of when he was born, and that the only true-born Irishman among us. And he was a former general secretary of the Unionist Party, but he had become a journalist for a long time. But was distinguished himself in that. Aidan Hennigan of the Irish Press, who died in 2016 in his 90s, had been born before Ireland had left the Commonwealth. So he was the one possibly who, not one possibly, but he was another one who could actually have claimed his British passport. So all of Ireland's media coverage at that time, by sound, people sound on the national question, it must be said, but they were all UK born.
And Mike Burns got an MBE, but you allude in the article that he was offered a higher honor.
He was earlier, and
with his daughter.
Didn't care. Oh no, he didn't have a daughter. He had sisters. He demurred when he was offered one several years earlier, but then in 2004, it was. He thought, oh, sure, why not? His sisters would like to go to see Buckingham Palace, so they had a day out at the palace. So he accepted his MBE for that reason.
Right. Good of him to have initially sort of resisted it. I mean,
he was, as I said, he was the most unpretentious individual you could possibly meet. He did not care for airs and graces. He was he was a remarkable journalist, but an even more remarkable person, an absolutely extraordinary gentleman.
I think I remember reading somewhere about somebody deciding whether to accept an honor like that, and apparently when if you say no, you can't really publicly say, I've said no to this.
It's bad form. It's considered bad form. I happen to know from other quarters.
Yes, yeah, no, but I mean, like, I don't know.
It is. You sounded out at the beginning to see if you would be so that the powers that be are not in the position of being snubbed. It has been suggested to us that you might be put forward. Would you be receptive to? And then you signal your assent.
Yes.
And then you go through the motions on that. So,
yeah, and just if you actually reject this offer, it's very much a private thing because there's no sense.
There's people like Albert Finney turned it down, Gareth Pearce. There's a number of people. As I said, it's gender, and they usually have had the good, the style, not to boast about it, it wouldn't come as a surprise then to learn that they had been offered it and turned it down.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of Irish people we haven't heard of that have said no.
There's quite a lot who've said yes.
Yeah, there really are. It's amazing who gets the trinkets. just going through the Wednesday's papers. So that's in the Irish World this week, which is out tomorrow in Ireland, but today in London.
In Ireland on Thursday, and it's Wednesday. It's across the UK.
Okay. Wednesday's papers: NAMA social housing lost by councils. This is a story. I'm not sure if you got to see that, Bernard. Did you?
I saw the headline. I saw it when you sent it over earlier. I'm not across the detail on it. I do.
Okay.
I do know that there's a lot more that in the 1970s. I think when you had the beginning of what we now know to be modern Ireland, when you had the education, pre-secondary education introduced by Don O'Malley in the late 60s. So got to pick up the benefits of that later on. Council housing or social housing, as it's now known, was a huge social boon, and it did an awful lot to equalize society in Ireland, even though people try to demonize some of the estates, and that even into the 80s that persisted. But I think since the Tiger, Ireland seems to have lost its way in an equitable mix of housing. And anyone who looks at rents in Dublin, I think we interviewed a band the other week, they're Irish, but from Greystones, contemporaries of Hosier, but they got up and moved to Berlin, and their peer group, who'd all be in their 20s, couldn't believe that they could afford to live and eat and pursue their artistic career in Berlin in a way that they couldn't even dream of it in Dublin, because it's so expensive for so many people.
Yeah, a lot of creative types, Irish creative types in Berlin.
As you're well aware, I think.
Yeah, I was there for a while, and fantastic kind of music scene, particularly with the Irish. GA not contacted about 2030 World Cup bid.
Oh, there's a surprise.
This is a great story, presumably for you, Bernard. Irish-British joint bid.
It's Theresa May, actually, I think, was the first to be receptive to that about 4 or 5 years ago now.
Okay, good.
And I think we had a front page story about it at the time. At the moment, I think over here, Boris Johnson has offered to host all of the games of the European Championships, or the European Cup in soccer, because the semi-finals and the finals, I think, are due to be played in Wembley, and then the other games over several different countries in Europe. But they think that could actually, at the moment, they're trying to recreate a kind of sense of 1966, and so pushing that on the agenda, so that along with like the Boris bounce from the vaccines, that they would look to try and recreate elections of 66.
Actually, the cover of tomorrow's UK Sun is very frighteningly jingoistic. This is the Irish Sun. Sorry, I just forgive me. Having a hell of a night with it, or a hell of a week with it. Well, I do this. How are things over there now? Is it got Ballardian?
No, I've said to you before, that's not people here aren't like that. People adapt, they adjust. It is strange, and people, but people do adapt. And there are signs from some of the economic statistics that by November as well, they weren't as they had started to recover from a very, very bleak drop earlier in the year, as businesses started to acquaint themselves with what they call the new normal. One thing you have on all the front pages for tomorrow, certainly from here, is, and it's heavily trailed, it's Rishi Sunak's budget, and the government has bitten the bullet and said that they will continue, even though they hope to end lockdown by June 21st. They'll continue the furlough payments through July, August, and into September, but with employers being asked to pick up 10% and then 20% of the cost, as I said, as it tapers off in July and August. They've also brought in, I think, 500,000 self-employed people who were not eligible for grants beforehand. And this is one long, very, very slick promotion as well for Rishi Sunak. And so he's being eyed warily by the current occupant of number 10.
He's slick, is the Chancellor, isn't he? I mean,
He is, but there's a certain kind of residual bounce back because some of the or begrudgery, for want of a better word, because some of the members of the 1922 committee, which is the trade union for Tory MPs, and others see him advancing himself and being a little too keen to advance himself. And they say that it's easy to do when it's with borrowed money. One of the debates going on here at the moment is that this is no time for tax increases, when obviously tax will be needed tax increases will be needed, and they will be sneaked in by being delayed into next year with a freeze on, say, a gradual increase in presumably corporation tax, and with a freeze on income tax allowances, but things like excise duty for fuel will probably not be changed. So it's all, I mean, I think Gary Given, who's a respected political editor over here, had said that it used to be one day, but now if you look at, and chancellors used to resign if the details of the budget were leaked in advance. This is now a year-long affair with it being trailed in as favoured media outlets all the time. So there will be few surprises. There might be one headline grabbing surprise tomorrow.
okay. Okay, just to get back to kind of local parochial Ireland, Garda dispersed hundreds of students at Limerick party. There's a sense, certainly in Ireland.
I saw a video of that on social media tonight.
Oh, right, I haven't seen it.
And it was quite concerning.
Do you feel, I understand Texas, in fact, there's a tweet here from...
In Texas, the governor there has ended lockdown, ended restrictions, and reversed the mandate on masks.
What do you think? What do you think of that, Bernard?
It's done quite deliberately to be provocative, because you've had to play to a particular cohort within the Republican Party. It is quite clear from the evidence that we are seeing here that lockdown has brought down. I mean, we are now seeing the hospital admissions and the infections dropping quite dramatically. And it's too early for that to have been because of vaccinations, although the vaccinations will now bring their own dividend in coming weeks. We've seen a lot of kind of the equivalent of, I don't know, creationism or fundamentalism amongst some politicians, both in Britain, in Ireland, and in America. But in America in particular, it seems to be a proxy for other politics to just go into denial about the dangers caused by the spread. But at the same time, Biden has said that he's spoken to the various vaccine producers and hopes to have enough vaccines for everybody in the United States by the end of May.
And how do you think will they punish Texas for doing this? Do you think the federal government?
I'm not an expert. I think any kind of, when federal government, American politics has a strict divide. It's supposed to have a strict divide between states matters and federal matters. And I think the scale of problems in Biden's inbox are such that he doesn't really want to get enmeshed in something like that. It would just be...
And as the Supreme Court decided, Texas has no standing, wasn't that the...
Yes.
So it's revenge for that. So the furlough extended is called... They're talking about August. So what do you think, Bernard? They're looking at autumn now, maybe, for...
They're talking in September. Talking about the 80% of salaries that are up for employees who are furloughed will be tapered, with employers being asked to contribute 10%, I think, in July towards the hours not worked.
But how can they be talking about Glastonbury and things like that, Bernard? Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but how can they be talking about concerts in the summer when they're talking about furlough till September?
Well, furloughing isn't compulsory. I mean, some companies have actually, something like Glastonbury would be, I don't know that they would have full staff. That would be seasonal by definition, but... I
meant surely though the people will be back working by August. That's my argument. If they're going to Glastonbury or if they're going to rock concerts and whatnot.
Well, there are a lot of people still working as is.
Yeah, no.
And you'll get an awful lot of students, and you'll get a lot. But Glastonbury and the Edinburgh.
But the scheme is being extended till September, so they must feel.
For those who are in furlough, it doesn't mean that everybody is furloughed. Remember, there's a lot of people. Some are on short time. Some have been redundant. Some are working from home.
Okay.
Not everybody. I mean,
so the furlough doesn't represent the furlough scheme doesn't represent their feelings that the virus will remain or that the restrictions will remain till then.
Well, a lot of it is unknown territory, which is why last week when we were talking, the health advisor said that there's the 5-week windows between the easing of the lockdown. I think next month, April 12th, is the gyms and other kind of businesses like that. Then May, it widens, and then their target is June 21st to remove all lockdowns. But with May, international travel is when they hope to see international travel resumed, which is around the time as well that they hope to have I think by June, they hope to have the report of their special committee on whether, excuse me, not they will have their own vaccination passports. But as we see as well, the EU is looking at its green card, which is what the Israelis call it, and Chancellor Angela Merkel said that'll take about 3 months to get through all the technical detail on that. And she was the first person to raise the possibility that third party or third countries could join the scheme, like IATA, which would open the way for Britain. Meanwhile, you've got countries like Spain, Greece, who depend very heavily on British tourism, even talking about possibly opening their own corridors and having their own system with Britain. So that work is underway, and they hope to be able to open up tourism by the summer.
Okay. And the unvaccinated then will be like the untouchables. Me and you, Bernard. Sorry, you're getting the vaccine.
I will when the time comes. My wife and daughter got it, at least their first one. I'm rather. Apparently, I'm deemed young and fit, or young and healthy, so I'm not in one of the risk groups, or younger than some. But you were talking about the going around unclean, like the pox doctors are having to wear a bell. It's not quite that bad. I mean, already if you travel to certain destinations, you would have a certificate saying that you've been vaccinated against yellow fever, and all of the because of where we are here in West London, there's regular signs offering tests and vaccinations for things like yellow fever. The apprehension is extending the system on a domestic basis, because this government and Johnson and others have in the past set themselves against things like ID cards, because Tony Blair, who was very impressed by Singapore, liked the idea of ID cards, and the last time they were a thing here was during the Second World War, when even not possessing one, you were committing a criminal act. So it's something that is part of the identity of these Tories and others here, that British people don't need ID cards. Yet they will readily give away all their details for a loyalty card to Tesco. But so they don't want that kind of unevenness happening. Say domestically, that people need to produce it to be able to go to a club or to a concert, because you might see some kind of discrimination. Israel is operating that successfully, that people who can say that they are vaccinated or that they are COVID-free can enter a restaurant or a sporting event or a concert.
Okay. I don't know where this leads me. I mean, I'd probably wait till they just go door to door, with the jackboots.
There is a public health issue. Just go refresh your memory with the Typhoid Mary case, and then just that.
You mentioned the yellow fever and all that malaria stuff. I mean, I've got those, but they're tried and trusted. I mean, usually these kind of vaccines will be at the white mice stage. Also, that's I'm not trying to be glib, but I'm sort of trying to be.
It's an apprehension that people have. It's real. People are, they're not, I mean, there are some who are there thinking that Bill Gates is tracking them, and but nobody whom I know who's had it has urged people to update their Windows software yet. But
yeah, but I mean, it's not a bad kind of now look at his bloody kind of computer system. I mean, you know, he's kind of aesthetically on every front, you know, is an affront really. But
well, let's trust him
with the vaccine. Look at Bernard. Look, honestly, if you trust this guy,
leave Gates out of it.
No, you brought him up.
Yes, I know. I was being glib, not for the first time. But you make the point. You make a valid point there that people believe the other vaccinations you've had are tried and tested. Because of the speed with which these have come to market. We did see the head of the Medicines Licensing Agency just before Christmas run through all of the testing and approval process, and it had been very, very rigorous. The resources were put, it happened in parallel. So a lot of the testing, a lot of the kind of approvals process was speeded up quite significantly. People didn't go into the dark with this. They were able to do it because they were given permission by the European Medicines Agency, which still applied. So all of it's where a lot of the money went. A lot of that, they have been rigorous in the testing. It's not that they have just said, look, we've got this, we've cut a few corners here. So they have had strict protocols. So, and that is where they found that people who've been resistant when, say, medical staff have taken the time to explain to people who have been worried, then there is the signs that has allayed their fears and their concerns. There will be people who will, just as we had with, I think the autism scare some years ago, which was based on a fraudster by the name of Andrew Wakefield, just refuted suggestions that, but scared an awful lot of people that taking measles vaccinations or any of those caused autism.
I remember last year, I think a Sunday Times journalist got on to us and said, "What's your position on the, you know, the vax? You know, are you anti-vax?" And like I said, you know, well, you know, thalidomide and whatnot. You know, he didn't know what I was talking about. But I mean,
well, thalidomide wasn't a vaccination.
No, but I mean, what I'm saying is that the medical, you know, profession doesn't have an absolute pristine record in anything, really, you know, and
why there are protocols.
Yeah, even with protocols, it's funny, you know. I certainly, look, I mean, it's such a, you know, it's crazy. Like, you know, you can't really discuss it. I mean, I know, and I won't really. And I'm glad that, you know, you feel happy taking it. I certainly would not like to take it and won't take it.
Which is your position.
Yeah,
but exactly. It is a public health issue. If, for instance,
well, you say that, but if you've got the vax, why should my condition be any interest to you?
I'll refer you back to typhoid Mary. Public health, the infectiousness, the risk of infecting other people. It's why we were.
But you've got your vax, though, aren't you?
I haven't.
Protected from that. I mean, you're protected from malaria with the injections.
Sorry,
you know, like if I flew with you to Africa, if we went to Zaire, and I didn't get my shots, but you got your shots, what the hell is it to do with you?
Well, you're not an Anopheles mosquito that's going to bite and drink the blood and then infect, which is the way malaria tends to be.
Well, if I'm going to hang around with you, maybe, you know, I mean, you might feel that way.
I don't think that's how it's transmitted.
But you would be, but wouldn't that be on wouldn't it be on my back if, okay, I got yellow fever, but he didn't get the shot, so, and you could walk away thinking, yeah, so that's tragedy, but it was his choice.
What we do have, I mean, if outside that window there, I can walk along a couple of streets where there's, I think since last year, and that's within about a mile, less than a square mile, 30 people have died. And they weren't all written off as the way, but others have been ill. There's a couple of neighbors, and we would be a relatively affluent and prosperous area. There are other parts, even within this borough, less so and down the road. If I would prefer, as I know many people would, and I've a couple of my neighbours are paramedics, to take my chances with the vaccine, not just for self-interest, than take my chances in ITU or with the disease itself. But the public health element is it is highly infectious. There are people who are asymptomatic carriers. There are just even breathing.
I appreciate that, Bernard. But if you have the vax, if everybody's taking the vax, I mean, you said Biden had got one for everyone in America.
Yeah, that's what he's professed he can do by the end of May. If people have, then yes, then that's a good. Then that diminishes the. You reach a point, one hopes, where it can, when it's not in the community, it can't mutate, and you can't get more pernicious versions of COVID out there. But at the moment, one of the reasons we've got some particularly nasty and pernicious ones at the moment is because it was able to spread as far and as wide as it was, as it did. But if you can suppress it, you can suppress that infectiousness with it. And that one way of doing that, not the only way of doing it, is to stop people's infectiousness.
Okay. Okay, it's so contentious again, isn't it, Bernard? I hope I haven't been.
You haven't caused any offence if that's what you're worried about. And
well, no, you're right. And the vast majority of our readers, honestly, totally 100% back what you're saying. Completely 100%, Bernard. I'm not. So what I'm not even playing devil's advocate or something.
It's a genuine you have an apprehension. The apprehension is there. It's particularly. It seems to be particularly strong among communities who are, in turn, most at risk because of where they are socioeconomically, the jobs they hold, the kind of their exposure, their contact. But people from, say, immigrant communities, they tend to be used as a shorthand, which can be reductive. Black, Asian, minority, ethnic. And there's some pushback against that, but that's the shorthand that, say, public health and government planners use, and say some of the representative groups. But they have had a big concern about apprehension about vaccinations among those groups, and that they are trying to address that. But it is real. And then there are others. I mean, people are, as I said to you, it happened with the measles vaccinations, and as a result of that, people being afraid that it caused autism, we saw a huge increase in measles infections and measles deaths, something that had otherwise been eradicated. So people, those fears need to be engaged and addressed. It's when people are airily dismissed, you then get that alienation from people perceived to be the elite or being talking down. And so it is something that needs to be engaged. And where that has happened, people have looked at it in a different way.
Where that has happened, yeah. It really hasn't happened in Ireland. I mean, I have to be...
People don't like high-handedness.
Well, they certainly don't, they don't want balance on these subjects. They just want, or any kind of balance. They think the balance is anti sort of, or pro-disease or something.
Well, don't confuse balance with false equivalence. We've disagreed on this in the past, and
we have. But this false equivalence thing, I don't buy either. You kind of like try and be as balanced as you can, and attempt. The RT, like Mike Burns, you could probably assume that they were trying to be as impartial as they could be.
Oh, I'm not. When I say false equivalence, I mean when you have somebody who's a campaigner who has no expertise or knowledge speaking out again and put in some kind of oppositional way on a media talk show, so that you've got on the one hand, on the other hand, a lot of it's lazy journalism. But if you have somebody who has the medical authority or the epidemiological authority or the statistical authority and can speak from that position and offer a counter viewpoint, But sometimes that will involve a level of detail and nuance that politicians and media outlets, it must be said, neither have the time for, or one assumes their audiences either. But I think audiences probably would have greater time to listen. And if something is, you can take any complicated concept, and if you give a sufficiently courteous explanation, you can explain it. Anybody who isn't prepared to take the time to do that either isn't confident enough or doesn't know enough about it themselves, and they're blagging. It just
Yeah,
you get
I
that
know.
dogmatism.
I do. I hear you, but for somebody, it's kind of bizarro world if you're into civil liberties and freedom of speech and all the aspects that seemed to be a big deal when I was like growing up. I mean, they were kind of serious issues that you kind of stood by. And I was saying to you'd be quoting Voltaire, and to defend the right as an idiot, to say what he wanted to say, But now it's like such a weird.
Well, you remember the other You remember the other story about Voltaire? Supposedly apocryphal, but on his deathbed, the priest saw this as an opportunity to get him to renounce Satan and give him the last rites. To which Voltaire airily replied, "I think this is hardly the time to be making enemies."
Great one, isn't it? Well, I hope I haven't made an enemy of you tonight, Bernard.
We've known each other too long, John.
We have. Actually, we just to kind of half lighten the mood. In fact, not lighten the mood, but the racing post. This guy, the horse trainer, Elliot, is going to be kicked out of whatever. I suppose
Well, none of his horses can race in the UK until there's been a thorough and conclusive investigation by the Irish horse racing authorities. And it appears that there have been reports that another rider of one of his horses was seen sitting on a dead horse as well.
Yeah.
And
a young jockey or an amateur jockey. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
No, please continue.
Was he an Irish? I sort of sense he might be. Was he Irish?
Well, it's an Irish stable.
Okay. Is this a thing? I thought we loved our horses. I really did.
I can't help thinking that if the biggest sin that's been committed here in the eyes of horse racing is that he was caught. I mean, so to listen to some jockeys as well, you'd wonder
really?
if there'd be quite the same furore if somebody was seen sitting on a dead jockey on the phone. I've just been flippant there, John.
No, but I know, but I feel what you're saying could be, not far off. I mean, it was pretty foul, wasn't it? Can I just say that?
It was grotesque. It was grotesque.
Yeah, it was.
It was utterly grotesque, and I think that well-known humanitarian Michael O'Leary whose horses he trains, so was very moved by his genuine apology. And looking for the kind to animals and people. I mean,
I'm surprised you didn't use it as a Ryanair ad for some.
So yes, we see a Photoshop of a respected trainer sitting on the prostate body of a Ryanair passenger. I think we better get out of this because we're getting up with a writ being served at some time.
Literally flogging a dead horse here. Yeah, well, but I thought even kind of O'Leary would love the horses and stuff like that. I mean, I thought that world even. I mean, they're very valuable horses. Why would they really be running them to that kind of to the ground kind of thing?
Yes. I don't move in those circles.
No, I don't.
I think somebody you should ask about this if you get the chance is Alan Byrne. He's the managing director of the Racing Post from Dublin. I think you may have worked with him on the paper in the past.
Briefly, he was in the Sunday Times.
Yes, but he was on the Tribune, I think. And he was news editor there. But he eats, sleeps, and breathes horse racing and horses. Always has, even since he was a teenager, and he's very, very knowledgeable on the subject. Well,
that's his paper then tomorrow. Is I noticed they don't run the picture in the racing press, the photograph in question, but I suppose suppose they don't need to see it.
Well, it had appeared all over the weekend, and I think if you look at your front pages, you may have had it in Monday's front pages in the racing.
Yeah, no, just that the racing papers were shied away from. Ian St. John, the former Liverpool and St. and Greaves, the presenter, has died.
Yes, I saw that. And I think there's interviews with Jimmy Greaves, the Spurs player, who's his great friend, because I think they were double act as pundits throughout the years. And St. John would have been part of that legendary, and I am no expert on soccer, trust me, but part of that legendary side in the 70s that won everything around them. They were and I think it may have been St. John or one of Eminent Hughes or somebody of that ilk in that era, who said that they wouldn't pass the most basic fitness test today compared to say modern £100,000 a week footballers, and they a bit like the Irish rugby team that come onto the pitch sometimes having been clubbing until an hour or two before, smelling of fags and drink, and they beat everything around them. They were unstoppable.
I think Steve Highway would have, been pretty fast today. I mean, he would have been
he was a big hero as well in Dublin when I was growing up.
Yeah, so most famous for having gone to university, I think, is the only first division player at the time. I remember Shoot did it kind of, he's a boffin, he's an egghead, what's he doing? Kind of.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's it. I think that's the papers. Balls. What is that? It's a story, Bernard.
It's a Daily Star story. It's about a couple who claimed they just missed out on the £182 million Euro Millions lottery the other day. It was their usual numbers, but for some reason they made a mistake. So I'm sure we all share their.
Yeah, that's a really weak story. Do they proof of this now? This is nonsense. I'm
really not part of the Daily Star's editorial process.
Bernard, thanks a lot. Hopefully we've been